Ladies and gentlemen, let me take you to a place where history is being rewritten, not in the halls of diplomacy, but on dusty roads and village fields in West Africa. The country is Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation at the heart of the Sahel, where decades of militant violence have scarred communities and forced millions to live in constant fear. But something remarkable is happening. A new chapter in national security has begun under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. For years, the story was grim. Militants roamed freely, ambushing convoys, overrunning villages, and terrorizing farmers. Families abandoned their homes, markets closed, schools were shuttered. Security forces, under-equipped and stretched thin, often reacted too late, arriving only after the damage was done. To outsiders, Burkina Faso became another symbol of instability, another crisis zone in a region already struggling with poverty, hunger, and war. But then the script changed. Since 2022, when a young captain named Ibrahim Traoré took the helm, the government has steadily invested in modern tools of defense, surveillance drones, armored vehicles, disciplined training. What once seemed like a losing battle has turned into a series of surprising victories. And the most dramatic example unfolded just weeks ago, on August 20th, 2025, in the small eastern town of Foutouri. At dawn that day, an estimated 600 militants launched a massive offensive. Their goal was not just to strike a local outpost, but to destabilize the region and reassert their control. In the past, such a strike might have succeeded. The militants relied on speed, numbers, and the element of surprise. But this time, they were walking into a trap. High above them, circling silently, were Turkish-made Bayraktar drones, equipped with cameras capable of tracking every movement. The soldiers on the ground were already prepared. What followed was not a desperate defense, but a coordinated counter-operation. In a matter of hours, over 100 militants were killed, including two of their most important leaders. Weapons, motorcycles, and ammunition were seized. And perhaps most importantly, ordinary villagers who had long lived in fear spoke of a new feeling: relief. This opening raises a crucial question for us. Is Burkina Faso finally turning the tide against militant violence, or is this only a temporary moment of strength? To answer that, we need to look deeper at the battle itself, the strategy behind it, and the lives it has touched. The Battle of Foutouri on August 20th, 2025 is more than just a headline. It was a turning point that showed how much Burkina Faso's military has evolved under Ibrahim Traoré. To understand its meaning, we need to carefully walk through what actually happened that day. The sun had barely risen when the assault began. Witnesses recall the rumble of motorcycles and trucks echoing through the valley, carrying hundreds of armed men. They were estimated at nearly 600 militants, enough to overwhelm a local garrison in minutes. Their plan was straightforward: descend quickly, strike hard, and capture key positions before reinforcements could arrive. But this time, the militants' element of surprise was gone. Hours earlier, circling drones had detected unusual movement across the scrublands. These unmanned aerial vehicles, Bayraktar drones supplied from Turkey, were equipped with advanced cameras capable of spotting clusters of fighters miles away. The footage streamed in real time to command centers where analysts flagged the threat. Local units were warned, armored convoys were mobilized, and defensive positions were prepared before the militants reached their target. When the first wave of fighters advanced, they were already under observation. Mortar teams had coordinates. Armored vehicles were in place. Soldiers were not scrambling in panic, but waiting with discipline. What followed was a counter-operation, not merely a defense. By mid-morning, the battlefield had shifted. Reports confirmed that over 100 militants were eliminated. Among them were two key leaders: Abu Suleiman, known as the chief logistician, the man who kept weapons and fuel flowing, and Abdul Badre, the ideological commander, responsible for indoctrination and recruitment. Their deaths left a vacuum in the chain of command, forcing the remaining fighters into disarray. Many retreated chaotically, abandoning motorcycles, rifles, and belts of ammunition. Neutral observers compared it to watching a storm disperse once the winds collapse. Without leadership, the force crumbled. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. For the people of Foutouri, the difference was deeply personal. One local farmer, interviewed after the clash, described how he and his family had hidden inside their mud brick home, bracing for the worst. In the past, they would have burned our crops and taken our goats, he said. But this time, we heard the drones, then the gunfire, and then silence. When we came out, the soldiers were still standing. For years, these families lived at the mercy of militants who could strike at will. The Foutouri victory gave them something rare, a sense that their government was not only present, but capable of protecting them. Another telling account came from a young soldier who took part in the operation. He explained that what gave him confidence was not only the weapons, but the clarity of intelligence. "Before, we fought blind," he said. "Now we see them before they see us. We know their numbers, their direction, their weapons. That changes everything." Indeed, information proved decisive. In asymmetric warfare, where one side relies on mobility and surprise, the ability to track movements in real time flips the balance. Instead of reacting, the army anticipated. Instead of chaos, there was coordination. The seizure of weapons also mattered. Every motorcycle captured was one less rapid strike vehicle for the insurgents. Every machine gun removed was one less tool for terror. It was not only a symbolic victory, but a practical weakening of their capacity to regroup. For Ibrahim Traoré, the message was clear. Burkina Faso would no longer wait passively for militants to dictate the terms of battle. The state would seize initiative. His government presented Foutouri as evidence of a doctrine that blends technology, discipline, and national pride. Yet, questions remain. Militants adapt quickly. Leaders can be replaced. Some analysts warn that while Foutouri was a triumph, it does not guarantee lasting peace. The real test is whether Burkina Faso can replicate such successes consistently across vast rural regions. Still, the symbolism of August 20th cannot be overstated. For the first time in years, citizens saw militants not as an unstoppable force, but as a defeated one. For many in Foutouri, the memory of this day is already etched into family stories, the morning when fear gave way to hope. And here lies the deeper significance. Foutouri was not just a military engagement. It was a statement. Burkina Faso has the capacity to fight back, to reclaim territory, and to protect its people. It was a demonstration of how deliberate investments, drones, armored vehicles, training, can change the trajectory of a nation long considered vulnerable. But this raises the next big question. If Foutouri shows what is possible inside Burkina Faso, what does it mean for the broader Sahel region, where neighboring countries like Mali and Niger still struggle under similar threats? The Battle of Foutouri was not just another line in a military report. It became a climax, a defining moment that carried weight far beyond the battlefield. For Burkina Faso, for its people, and for observers across Africa, it marked a turning point. A moment when weakness gave way to confidence, and when a small nation sent a loud message: "We will not bow to terror." News of the victory spread quickly. Within hours of the confrontation, state television broadcast images of seized weapons and burnt-out militant vehicles. Soldiers stood tall beside armored convoys, and drones hovered in the skies above. To many Burkinabe, these images were more than propaganda. They were proof that their country had the capacity to resist. In a nation long accustomed to bad news, attacks, casualties, displacement, the images of Foutouri became a rare symbol of triumph. In the capital, Ouagadougou, celebrations broke out spontaneously in some neighborhoods. Groups of young people waved national flags, chanting Ibrahim Traoré's name. On social media platforms popular in West Africa, hashtags such as Burkina Resists and Foutouri Victory trended. For a society hungry for good news, Foutouri was not simply a military win, it was a moment of collective pride. But perhaps the most powerful reactions came from ordinary villagers in the east. For years, rural families had been the primary victims of insurgency. They had lost relatives to raids, seen schools burned, and fields abandoned. Now, they saw militants retreat in disarray. One woman in Foutouri told a local reporter, "I buried my husband after an attack 3 years ago. Since then, every night I prayed for protection. Today, I feel that prayer was answered." Such testimonies matter. They transform an abstract statistic, 100 militants killed, into lived experience. They show how victory translates into restored confidence, into children walking to school without fear, into farmers tending fields again. Yet, while many celebrated, others reacted with caution. Analysts warned that militant groups are resilient. Leaders can be replaced, tactics can change. Foutouri dealt a heavy blow, but insurgents across the Sahel have shown an ability to regroup after losses. The challenge, one security expert noted, is not winning one battle, but sustaining momentum over months and years. Even so, Foutouri reshaped the political atmosphere inside Burkina Faso. President Traoré seized the moment to deliver a speech broadcast nationwide. Dressed in military fatigues, he declared, This victory is not the end, but the beginning. Our forces are disciplined, our tools are modern, and our resolve is unbreakable. Burkina Faso will stand, and Africa will stand with us. His words resonated far beyond his country's borders. Across the Sahel, in Mali and Niger, where governments also struggle against insurgencies, citizens shared videos of Foutouri, expressing solidarity. Some commentators in regional media hailed it as proof that African nations could defend themselves without relying solely on foreign powers. In a continent where sovereignty is often tested by outside intervention, Foutouri became a story of self-reliance. International reactions were more measured. Western analysts acknowledged the tactical success, but emphasized the need for structural reforms, better governance, economic development, and regional cooperation to secure lasting peace. Still, even cautious observers admitted that Foutouri was one of the most decisive counterinsurgency operations in recent years. For militants, the defeat carried not only military, but psychological consequences. Their aura of inevitability cracked. In propaganda videos, they had long portrayed themselves as unstoppable, claiming divine protection and military superiority. But Foutouri told a different story, one of retreat, confusion, and leadership collapse. The deaths of Abu Suleiman and Abdul Badre were particularly damaging. Without Suleiman, supply lines falter. Without Badre, recruitment efforts lose coherence. For followers accustomed to seeing their leaders as untouchable, their elimination shook morale. Symbolically, Foutouri was a moment of reversal. For years, militants had chosen the time and place of attacks, forcing the army into reaction. This time, it was the army that dictated the terms, using drones to anticipate movements and setting a trap. The balance of initiative shifted. That shift may prove temporary, but for now, it changes perceptions both inside Burkina Faso and abroad. The climax of Foutouri lies not only in the numbers, 100 dead, 600 dispersed, but in the narrative it created. It turned fear into pride, despair into hope, and vulnerability into resilience. It elevated Ibrahim Traoré from a young officer leading a troubled nation to a symbol of African defiance. But with every climax comes a question: what happens next? Victories can inspire, but they can also provoke retaliation. Militants may seek revenge, striking softer targets. Regional dynamics may complicate efforts. And for ordinary civilians, the hope sparked in Foutouri could easily fade if insecurity returns. So while the Foutouri victory stands tall today, its ultimate significance will depend on what follows. Will Burkina Faso build on this momentum to secure lasting peace? Or will this triumph remain an isolated peak in a landscape of continued struggle? The victory at Foutouri was more than a tactical win. It rippled through the fabric of Burkina Faso society, touching daily life, shaping politics, and altering the way citizens viewed their government. For civilians, security is measured not in battlefield reports, but in whether they can walk to the market, send children to school, or tend fields without fear. Before the Foutouri operation, large parts of eastern Burkina Faso were paralyzed. Markets stood empty because traders feared ambushes on the roads. Parents kept children at home, worried schools would be attacked. Farmers abandoned their crops, leaving fields fallow even as food prices soared. In the weeks after Foutouri, reports began to surface of small but meaningful changes. Merchants cautiously reopened stalls. Farmers returned to plowing land long left idle. Schools welcomed students back. For communities that had grown accustomed to silence and fear, the sound of children laughing on their way to class, or the sight of smoke rising from cooking fires, felt like signs of rebirth. One story captured this shift vividly. A teacher in Foutouri explained that before August 20th, she taught only half her class. Many families had sent children away for safety. After the battle, she said, "I saw their faces again. The seats were full. Parents told me, 'We trust again.'" For her, that classroom was not just about education, but about restoring normalcy. Politically, the impact was equally profound. Since coming to power, Ibrahim Traoré has faced criticism both domestically and internationally. Some questioned whether a young captain could handle the immense challenges of governance. Others worried about the suspension of certain democratic processes. But Foutouri gave him a platform of legitimacy, rooted not in speeches, but in action. For many citizens, he proved that leadership was not about age or background, but about results. His administration used the momentum to reinforce a message of sovereignty. Foutouri was portrayed as evidence that Burkina Faso could protect itself without relying on foreign troops or aid. This message resonated strongly in a nation weary of dependency and skeptical of outside intervention. Traoré's insistence on self-reliance, using national resources to buy drones, training soldiers locally, and building confidence in homegrown solutions, gained credibility. Yet, victories carry responsibilities. As expectations rose, so did pressure on the government to deliver consistent security. People began to demand that the Foutouri model be replicated across other vulnerable regions. Every village wanted to feel the same relief. Every family wanted to believe their prayers would be answered too. The government now faced the difficult task of scaling success, expanding surveillance, training more units, and maintaining the discipline that made Foutouri possible. Civil society groups also weighed in. Some praised the military for restoring hope, while others cautioned against viewing drones and weapons as a cure-all. They argued that long-term peace required addressing the roots of insurgency, poverty, unemployment, and weak infrastructure. If young men saw no future in farming or education, militant recruiters would always find new audiences. Foutouri, they warned, was a victory in battle, but not yet a victory over the conditions that fuel extremism. Nevertheless, the psychological impact cannot be overstated. For years, militants had claimed inevitability, projecting themselves as the stronger force. Foutouri cracked that illusion. Villagers spoke openly of militants as weakened and afraid. Such shifts in perception are vital. When people believe the state is stronger, they are less likely to cooperate with insurgents. Confidence breeds cooperation, which in turn strengthens security. Politically, Traoré capitalized on this moment. He toured the eastern provinces, meeting communities, listening to grievances, and presenting himself not only as a commander-in-chief, but as a guardian of ordinary lives. His speeches emphasized dignity, sovereignty, and resilience. The symbolism of a leader standing among villagers, not behind a distant podium, mattered. It told people, you are not forgotten. But challenges remained. The economy was still fragile. Over 2 million Burkinabe remained displaced by years of conflict. Humanitarian needs were urgent, and international critics continued to question whether military success could translate into long-term stability. Foutouri bought the government time and credibility, but sustaining that momentum required balancing security with development. For many Burkinabe, though, the victory was enough to rekindle hope. A farmer in the east summarized it this way: "We don't expect miracles. We only want the chance to live without fear." Foutouri gave us a glimpse of that life. This glimpse of normalcy is what makes Foutouri politically significant. It shifted the narrative from helplessness to agency. It empowered a government struggling for legitimacy. And it reminded citizens that their sacrifices, their resilience, and their trust were not in vain. Yet, as one elder cautioned, a single rainy season does not end the drought. Foutouri must be followed by more victories, more protections, and deeper reforms. Otherwise, the hope it inspired risks fading as quickly as it rose. And this leads us to the wider question: how does Foutouri fit into the larger puzzle of the Sahel and the international response to militant threats? Foutouri may have been fought on Burkinabe soil, but its echoes reached far beyond West Africa. In Washington, Paris, and Brussels, policymakers paid close attention. For years, the dominant narrative had been that African nations could not secure themselves without heavy foreign support. Yet Foutouri suggested otherwise, that with the right tools and leadership, African armies could claim decisive victories on their own terms. The United States reacted cautiously. Official statements congratulated Burkina Faso for its progress in stabilizing conflict zones, but analysts in Washington quietly debated the implications. If nations like Burkina Faso can field effective drone-led operations, does that reduce the need for U.S. counter-terrorism missions in the Sahel? Or does it complicate them, as governments grow more resistant to foreign bases and direct intervention? For American security planners, Foutouri was both reassuring and unsettling. European capitals had similar dilemmas. France, long a dominant security player in the region, has seen its influence wane amid popular resentment of foreign troops. The Foutouri victory underscored this trend, a local force succeeding without French boots on the ground. To some in Paris, it felt like confirmation that the era of French-led counterinsurgency in West Africa is fading. Meanwhile, in regional forums, leaders from Mali and Niger publicly praised Burkina Faso's achievement, presenting it as a model for the Sahel alliance they are building. Pan-African commentators celebrated Foutouri as a symbol of sovereignty, a rebuttal to decades of dependency on foreign armies. In their view, Foutouri was not just about Burkina Faso. It was about Africa asserting control of its destiny. Yet global analysts also raised concerns. Militants, though weakened, are not gone. Some warned that decisive victories could provoke retaliation, pushing insurgents to target softer civilian sites. Others pointed out that drones and armored vehicles are expensive, requiring steady funding and maintenance. Without broader political reforms and economic investment, military gains may prove temporary. For the United States in particular, Foutouri raises a deeper strategic question. What role should America play in a region where sovereignty is being asserted so strongly? Should it adapt by focusing on partnerships and technology sharing, or risk alienation by insisting on traditional military footprints? The answer remains unclear. What is certain is that Foutouri has forced a recalibration. A small nation stood tall, and the world noticed. But even as policymakers debate, one reality remains. For Burkinabe villagers, what matters is not strategy papers in Washington or Paris. It is whether tomorrow will be safer than today. And that leads us to our final chapter. What lies ahead for Burkina Faso, and what risks and opportunities the next months might bring. The story of Foutouri is more than a single victory. It is a reminder of how fragile and yet how transformative moments of security can be. For the people of Burkina Faso, the events of August 20th were not abstract strategy. They were a glimpse of what life could be like without fear. For farmers, it meant planting without looking over their shoulders. For children, it meant sitting in classrooms instead of hiding at home. For soldiers, it meant standing tall, not as underdogs, but as protectors of a nation reclaiming its dignity. Yet victories, however decisive, are never final in the Sahel. Militants adapt. Leaders are replaced. Retaliation is a constant risk. History shows that insurgencies rarely collapse after one defeat. They bend, they regroup, and they search for the next weakness. Burkina Faso now faces the challenge of sustaining momentum, turning one shining moment into a long-term trajectory. Politically, Foutouri strengthens Ibrahim Traoré's legitimacy. He has positioned himself not just as a commander-in-chief, but as a symbol of sovereignty. His emphasis on self-reliance, on rejecting dependency, resonates across Africa. But with that symbolism comes expectation. Citizens will demand more futuries. If future operations fail, or if insecurity resurges, disappointment could be sharp. Looking ahead 3 to 6 months, several scenarios are possible. The optimistic case: Burkina Faso leverages this momentum, expanding drone surveillance, strengthening alliances with Mali and Niger, and restoring stability across multiple provinces. Communities slowly rebuild, regional cooperation deepens, and militants face